Carl Jung documented something that makes most psychologists uncomfortable. When empaths heal their deepest wound, the people they attract change instantly. Not gradually, instantly. This isn't wishful thinking or self-help nonsense. This is a psychological transformation so powerful that Jung called it terrifying. But here's what nobody tells you about this transformation. The empath's core wound isn't what you think it is. And when it finally heals, the shift in who they attract isn't just noticeable. It's absolute. Jung spent years studying empaths who arrived in his clinic completely broken. They came in apologizing for existing, blaming themselves for every bad thing that happened to them, systematically enduring abuse from everyone around them. These people had become what Jung termed emotional shock absorbers for their entire social systems. They absorbed alcoholic parents' rage. They absorbed spouses' infidelity. They absorbed family dysfunction. And they did it silently, never complaining, always trying harder to be good enough. What made Jung's observation so groundbreaking was the pattern he noticed beneath this apparent brokenness. These weren't random cases of abuse victims. These were individuals with a specific psychological profile. They possessed what he called differentiated intuitive perception, the ability to read micro-expressions, sense hidden emotions, and perceive psychological patterns that escaped everyone else completely. Jung tested this repeatedly in his clinical work. He would bring colleagues into sessions without telling his empath patients anything about them. Within minutes, these patients could identify childhood traumas, relationship patterns, and professional insecurities with accuracy rates that shocked him. One patient he documented achieved 97% accuracy in reading people she had never met before. This wasn't psychic ability. This was the human brain operating at a level of pattern recognition that most people never access. These empaths were processing emotional information faster and more accurately than anyone Jung had encountered. Their sensitivity wasn't a disorder. It was an advanced feature of consciousness development. But Jung noticed something that changed his understanding of human psychology forever. These empaths hadn't been broken by abuse. They had been studying it. Every single one of them kept detailed mental records of every person who had ever hurt them. They knew their abusers' triggers, insecurities, and deepest fears with surgical precision. They had mapped emotional patterns that escaped everyone else. They just never used this knowledge, not once, until something inside them snapped. Jung realized he wasn't treating victims. He was observing what he called psychological geniuses in hiding. Their minds weren't victim diaries. They were strategist war rooms, waiting for activation. And when that activation came, when the empath finally healed their core wound, everything changed. The gentle, broken person everyone underestimated became someone entirely different, someone who could no longer be manipulated, someone who attracted completely different people into their life. The transformation Jung documented wasn't subtle, it was absolute. Patients who had spent decades in toxic relationships suddenly left them with strategic precision. Empaths who had been emotionally dependent on validation became psychologically self-sufficient overnight. People who apologized for breathing started setting boundaries that felt like steel walls to those who once walked all over them. The core wound Jung identified in empaths isn't what most people assume. It's not childhood trauma. It's not abandonment issues. The core wound is this: the empath suppresses their own perception and intelligence to maintain relationships with people who cannot handle being seen clearly. Think about what that means. Empaths possess extraordinary ability to read people, sense hidden emotions, and perceive psychological patterns that others miss completely. They see through lies instantly. They feel the tension in every room. They know who's manipulating whom before anyone else notices. This isn't mystical. This is advanced pattern recognition that their brains are wired to perform. But here's the wound. Society teaches empaths that this gift is a curse. Every time they voice what they see, people call them too sensitive or overly emotional. Every time they point out obvious dysfunction, they get blamed for creating drama. Every time they express concern about manipulation, they clearly observe they're accused of being judgmental. Jung documented this pattern across hundreds of cases. The empath as a child says, "Mommy seems sad even, though she's smiling." The parent responds, "Don't be silly. I'm fine. You're too sensitive." The empath learns their perception is wrong. The empath at work says, "This colleague seems to be taking credit for others' work." The response, "You're being paranoid. Stop creating problems." The empath learns their intelligence is problematic. This conditioning runs deep. It doesn't happen once. It happens thousands of times across the empath's development. Each time they accurately perceive something others don't want to acknowledge, they get punished for it. Not with violence, with gaslighting, with dismissal, with the message that their greatest gift is actually their greatest flaw. So the empath learns to silence themselves, to doubt their perceptions, to apologize for seeing what others can't or won't see. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. They develop what Jung called the double consciousness. One part of them sees clearly, another part pretends to be blind. This split becomes their core wound, and this wound determines exactly who they attract into their lives. When empaths suppress their perception, they become magnets for manipulators. Jung documented this pattern repeatedly in his clinical work. The more empaths denied their ability to see clearly, the more they attracted people who needed someone blind to their games. It's not coincidence, it's psychological law. Manipulators can sense suppressed perception the way predators sense wounded prey. They're drawn to empaths who see everything but pretend to see nothing. These are perfect targets. People who know exactly what's happening but can be convinced they're wrong about their own observations. Jung spent years documenting how this dynamic plays out in real relationships. The manipulator does something obviously hurtful. The empath feels the hurt and recognizes the pattern. But instead of trusting this recognition, the empath questions themselves. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. The manipulator senses this self-doubt and reinforces it. You're imagining things. You're too emotional. You're making problems where none exist. The empath's perception was correct, but their core wound convinces them to suppress that correctness to maintain the relationship. Jung identified what he called the victim cycle that keeps this pattern repeating. The empath attracts a manipulator. The empath sees the manipulation clearly. The empath questions their own perception. The manipulator reinforces doubt. The empath suppresses their intelligence to maintain the relationship. The cycle continues until something breaks it. This cycle doesn't happen just once. It happens in friendship after friendship, relationship after relationship, job after job. The faces change, but the pattern remains identical. And each repetition deepens the core wound. Each time the empath denies their clear perception, they strengthen the belief that their seeing is wrong. Jung observed that empaths trapped in this cycle often develop what he called the apology complex. They apologize for existing. They apologize for having needs. They apologize for being hurt by things that would hurt anyone. This constant apologizing isn't humility. It's the wound expressing itself through behavior. But what Jung discovered next was revolutionary. This cycle doesn't end through gradual healing or therapy sessions. It ends in one explosive moment he called shadow integration under extreme duress. The trigger is always the same: betrayal so profound that the empath can no longer deny what they've been seeing all along. In case after case, Jung watched empaths discover infidelity, financial manipulation, or systematic emotional abuse from people they completely trusted. What made it devastating wasn't the act itself. It was the realization that they had seen every warning sign and ignored them all. The empath remembers the moment 6 months ago when something felt off. They remember the conversation that didn't add up. They remember the intuitive hit they dismissed as paranoia. They remember every single red flag they talked themselves out of seeing. And in the moment of discovery, all of it comes rushing back with crystal clarity. This is what breaks the cycle, not the betrayal, the recognition that their perception was right all along, that they weren't crazy, that they weren't too sensitive, that they saw everything correctly and chose to doubt themselves instead of trusting what they knew. Jung documented what happened next across dozens of these cases, and it terrified him. The empaths didn't cry, they didn't scream, they didn't fall apart like their abusers expected. Instead, something shifted inside them that was permanent and absolute. Jung called it the clarity event, the moment when the empath's pattern recognition finally overwhelmed their need to believe the best in people. These empaths became unnaturally calm. They stopped apologizing. They stopped explaining. They simply began speaking truth with clinical precision, not with cruelty, with clarity. They revealed everything they had observed, catalogued, and silently endured. Every lie, every manipulation, every calculated move. And they did it without emotion, like surgeons identifying diseased tissue before removing it. This wasn't revenge. This was what Jung termed shadow integration, the moment when the empath stops denying the parts of themselves they were taught to hide. Their suppressed intelligence, their silenced intuition, their denied strength. The shadow in Jungian psychology isn't evil. It's everything about ourselves that we've rejected or repressed. For empaths, the shadow contains their most powerful qualities. The intelligence they were told was problematic, the perception they were taught to doubt, the strength they learned to hide. When empaths integrate their shadow, they don't become dark or cruel. They become complete. They reclaim the parts of themselves they sacrificed to make others comfortable. They stop pretending to be less perceptive than they are. They stop apologizing for seeing clearly. When empaths integrate their shadow, they become what Jung called psychologically complete. And this completion changes everything about who they attract. Jung followed these transformed patients for years after their breakthrough. What he discovered kept him awake at night. These individuals had become extraordinarily successful. Their businesses thrived because they could read clients' real needs instantly. Their new relationships were healthy because they identified emotional predators within minutes. Their decisions were flawless because they trusted their intuitive intelligence completely. But here's what truly disturbed Jung. These transformed empaths hadn't become less empathetic. They had become perfectly empathetic, which meant they were also perfectly strategic. They could manipulate others as easily as they had once been manipulated. They understood human psychology at a level that made them nearly omnipotent in social situations. Yet they chose not to use this power destructively. They simply removed toxic people from their lives and moved on. Jung realized he had witnessed the birth of what he called the integrated empath, someone with both the sensitivity to feel everything and the wisdom to choose what deserved their energy. This is where the attraction flip happens. And it happens instantly, because the empath's energy signature changes completely. They're no longer sending signals that say, "I doubt my own perceptions." They're radiating something manipulators can feel in their bones. "I see you clearly, and you have no power here." Jung documented something he called the predator instinct. Manipulative people unconsciously avoid integrated empaths the way vampires avoid sunlight. They can't explain why. The empath isn't aggressive. The empath isn't cruel. But everyone senses something has fundamentally changed. The manipulator who once felt comfortable lying to this empath suddenly feels exposed. The narcissist who used to gaslight them feels their tactics bounce off like bullets off steel. The emotional vampire who used to drain their energy finds nothing to feed on anymore. The dynamic has shifted from one of porousness to one of impenetrability. Meanwhile, authentic. People feel safe around these transformed empaths for the first time. They're drawn to someone who can see them clearly, without judgment. Someone who won't enable dysfunction, but also won't attack. Someone who embodies what Jung called love with boundaries. Jung spent years documenting the mechanics of this shift. Before healing, empaths attract 3 types of people consistently. First, manipulators who need someone to control. Second, emotional dependents who need someone to fix them. Third, other wounded empaths who bond through shared victimhood. After healing, the attraction pattern completely inverts. First, integrated individuals who value being truly seen. Second, people actively working on their own growth who respect boundaries. Third, those with natural psychological maturity who don't need fixing or fixing others. The attraction flip isn't gradual, it's binary. Before healing the core wound, empaths attract people who need them to stay blind. After healing the core wound, empaths attract people who value being truly seen. Jung identified the exact mechanism behind this flip. When empaths suppress their perception, they operate from what he called participation mystique, a state where psychological boundaries dissolve and they become merged with others' unconscious contents. They absorb everyone's emotions. They feel everyone's pain. They carry everyone's shadows. This porous state broadcasts a specific signal. I have no boundaries. You can dump your psychological garbage here. Wounded people, manipulators, and emotional vampires pick up this signal unconsciously and swarm to it. They don't consciously think, here's someone I can exploit. They simply feel drawn to the empath's energy in ways they can't articulate. But when empaths heal their core wound, they stop being porous. They develop what Jung called conscious discrimination, the ability to distinguish between their own feelings and absorbed external content. They establish psychological boundaries that say clearly, I can feel your emotions, but they are not mine to carry. This shift in consciousness creates an energetic boundary that's invisible but absolute. The integrated empath can still sense others' emotions with the same accuracy. They can still read micro-expressions and detect hidden agendas. But now there's a filter. A conscious choice about what to absorb and what to simply observe. Jung documented this transformation in one of his patients from 1913. Before integration, she would leave every social interaction emotionally exhausted, having absorbed everyone's psychological states without realizing it. After integration, she could spend hours with troubled individuals and walk away energetically intact. She still felt their pain. She just no longer confused it with her own. This boundaried state broadcasts an entirely different signal. I see everything, but I'm no longer available for dysfunction. Manipulators repel from this energy. They need someone they can confuse, someone they can gaslight, someone who will doubt their own clear perception. The integrated empath offers none of that. The first time a healed empath encounters someone trying to manipulate them post-integration, the dynamic is striking. The manipulator uses tactics that worked perfectly before. The guilt trips, the gaslighting, the projection. But now they bounce off harmlessly. The empath simply looks at them with calm clarity and says something like, I see what you're doing. And no anger, no explanation, just clear boundary. The manipulator feels this shift viscerally. It's not that the empath has become mean or cold. It's that the access point they use to exploit no longer exists. The door is closed, the bridge is burned, and most importantly, there's no argument to be had about it. Jung warned about specific pitfalls that prevent empaths from completing this healing. The first pitfall is what he called the inflation trap. When empaths first discover their psychological gifts, they sometimes identify with them rather than integrating them. They become the prophet who must save everyone from unconsciousness. They wield their perception as a weapon instead of a gift. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly. The empath who just healed their core wound suddenly feels superior to everyone still trapped in unconscious patterns. They look at their old friends and family with contempt rather than compassion. They start every sentence with, "People are so blind," or "No one else can see what I see." This inflation prevents true healing because it's just another form of suppression. Instead of suppressing their power, they inflate it beyond their capacity to hold responsibly. The result is the same: attraction to dysfunction, just from a different angle. Now they attract people who want to be saved, or who will challenge their inflated sense of superiority. The second pitfall is withdrawal justification. Some empaths use their superior perception to justify complete isolation. They convince themselves that everyone is too unconscious to be worth engaging. Jung recognized this as spiritual superiority masquerading as wisdom. He documented cases where newly integrated empaths became hermits. They withdrew from all social contact, convinced that they had evolved beyond the need for human connection. But Jung understood this wasn't integration. It was fear wearing a spiritual mask. These empaths weren't protecting their energy. They were hiding from the work of learning to be in the world consciously. True healing doesn't lead to isolation. It leads to selective engagement. The integrated empath doesn't withdraw from the world. They participate more consciously, choosing carefully where their energy flows. They maintain connections with people at all levels of consciousness, but they do it with boundaries that protect their psychological integrity. The third pitfall is what Jung called the helper's high. Empaths who define themselves entirely through their ability to see and help others lose contact with their own development. Their perception becomes their identity instead of their integrated function. Jung observed that some empaths who healed their core wound immediately redirected all their energy into helping other empaths heal. While this impulse came from a genuine place, it became problematic when it consumed their entire identity. They stopped doing their own shadow work. They stopped developing their own interests. They became professional empaths rather than integrated humans who happen to be empathic. When perception becomes identity, the person disappears behind the function. This isn't healing. It's trading one wound for another. The old wound was I must suppress my gifts to belong. The new wound becomes my gifts are all I am. Every empath will face their transformation moment. The betrayal so profound, it forces them to choose between remaining a victim or becoming sovereign. This choice is what determines whether the core wound heals or deepens. Jung documented that most empaths, when pushed to their breaking point, choose integration. They don't become cruel. They become precise. They don't lose their hearts. They gain backbones. The transformed empath becomes what Jung called love with boundaries. Someone who can care deeply while protecting themselves absolutely. But this choice isn't made once. It's made repeatedly. Every day presents opportunities to slip back into the old pattern, to doubt clear perception, to suppress valid observations, to apologize for existing. The integrated empath must consciously choose their sovereignty again and again until it becomes their default state. Jung identified what he called the integration maintenance protocol. First, regular solitude to distinguish between absorbed emotions and authentic feelings. Second, conscious choice about when and with whom to engage perceptive abilities. Third, ongoing shadow work to prevent projection of unconscious contents. Fourth, connection with others capable of reality checking and support. Fifth, creative expression as an outlet for intense perceptual input. These practices aren't optional for the integrated empath, they're essential. Without them, the old patterns creep back in. The boundaries soften. The perception gets suppressed. The core wound reopens. The most beautiful part of Jung's findings is this: these transformed empaths didn't become different people. They became who they always were beneath the conditioning. Every empath carries within them the potential to become psychologically untouchable. It just takes the right catalyst to force that transformation. Jung's research revealed something that still makes psychologists uncomfortable. Empaths aren't naturally victims, they're naturally powerful. Society just teaches them to suppress that power in the name of being acceptable. When empaths finally stop suppressing, when they finally heal that core wound of self-doubt, they don't just change who they attract, they become forces of nature. The integrated empath achieves what Jung called sovereignty, not dominance, not superiority, sovereignty, the state of being complete within oneself while remaining open to connection. The ability to see clearly without needing to fix, the capacity to feel deeply without drowning, the wisdom to choose consciously rather than react unconsciously. The integrated empath doesn't need to announce their transformation. Others feel it immediately. Manipulators sense they can't operate their usual games. Authentic people recognize someone who won't enable their dysfunction or abandon them for having it. The empath becomes a living lie detector, not through judgment, but through presence. Jung's most profound insight about healed empaths was this: they achieve sovereignty, not isolation, not superiority, sovereignty, the ability to exist in the world fully, seeing clearly, feeling deeply, choosing consciously. They serve the collective, not by sacrificing their individuality, but by developing it so completely that it becomes a gift to the whole. The empath's greatest tragedy isn't their sensitivity. It's how long they wait to honor it properly. The goal is not to see less. The goal is to see more wisely, not to feel less deeply, but to choose more consciously what deserves that depth. Your sensitivity isn't your weakness, it's your weapon, and the day you learn to wield it consciously is the day you become truly powerful, not dangerous to innocent people, dangerous to those who would exploit your gifts. That's exactly what the world needs more of. Empaths who know their worth, trust their perceptions, and refuse to dim their light for anyone's comfort. The question isn't whether you'll transform, it's whether you'll do it consciously or let life force it upon you, because the empath will heal their core wound eventually. The only question is whether you'll direct that power or let it direct you. If you recognize yourself in this transformation pattern, you're part of a rare psychological type that Jung believed essential for consciousness evolution. Drop a comment below about which stage of healing you're currently in. Your journey connects with others walking the same path. And if you want to explore more of Jung's insights about psychological types that don't fit conventional patterns, check out the video on screen now, where I reveal the psychological environments that are particularly toxic for highly sensitive individuals, and Jung's strategies for protecting your consciousness while engaging with the world. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.